Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of Grow Great Live. I'm your host, Ria Lala, and with me I've got our co-hosts, Antonia Dodge and Mariana Pollack. And today we are talking about surprises and the surprises that come with your child walking in and possibly in a moment that's intimate with you and your partner, or you walking in to your child masturbating. How do we handle those situations? Because they're going to happen. So let's start off with you, Antonia. What do you think? Let's hear what you have to say.
Well, I have a sort of horrifying, trauma-inducing anecdote from my childhood around this. And what's funny is that in the monthly article when we talking about sex with your kids, I have this contrast between how my parents chose to deal with the sex topic. My mom, totally open, willing to talk about sex at any point, drew pictures whenever I asked, questions like, where do babies come from? And she write it all down. And so I had this sense of safety with my mom around the topic of sex. And then I had a moment when my dad did actually walk in on me masturbating. Right, and I was 11, and I was prepubescent, so I wouldn't actually qualify it as masturbation. I would more qualify it as exploration, because it wasn't for the intent of orgasming or getting off. It was just an exploration I was doing with my body. My dad just happened to walk in, and he did not know how to handle the situation at all. And so he knows he's supposed to do something, right? He's supposed to do something. So he comes over, and I'm in bed. It was at night. The lights were all out. I was, under the covers. As far as I was concerned, the house was, quiet, and everybody was, ending for the evening. And I have no idea why my dad entered the room. I don't know if he got some sort of sixth sense or what, but he entered the room. My hand jerked up. That's a total telltale sign. I'm only 10 or 11 years old. He comes over, he picks my hand up, he smells my hand, and he throws it down on the bed as if he was confirming what he thought, but he didn't know what to do about it. So he throws it on the bed and he storms out, and never was anything breathed about it again. And even at the moment, I was thinking, man, that's just not the way to handle it. And as an adult, I look back and I'm like, good gravy, Dad. How, that was the exact opposite way of handling that situation. Now, I know he was doing the best with what he had. I was his daughter. I'm his youngest. He calls me his heart's child. And here's this really uncomfortable subject of what he's doing to you. And he's old school, man. He is pre-baby boomer. My dad is in his 70s. So he's pre-baby boomer. This is the generation where you do not talk about it. His parents didn't give him any skills around it. So I can't really blame him. He was doing the best with what he had. And yet, to me, that's always in my mind imprinted on the wrong way of handling it. When you run into or you are surprised by a situation, first of all, the best way to deal with surprise is run drills beforehand. Be as prepared as you possibly can be. You may walk in on your child touching themselves. You may walk in on your child masturbate, actually full at it masturbating. If you recognize that those kinds of intimate situations can happen when you've run in on somebody doing something that frankly isn't your business, I guess I take that position. If my kids are masturbating, that's not really my business, right? Just like if I'm masturbating, that's nobody else's business. However, we really want to make sure that we encourage and guide our children down these paths. So when we run into a situation that is really not our business in the moment, however, we have concepts around when people should masturbate or if they should. To have a jarring situation where you have communicated to that child, and that was entirely nonverbal, by the way. From the point of opening the door to the point of him closing the door and leaving, there was not a word spoken. So that was an entirely unspoken communication. But there was no question of the shame that was communicated. So what can we do to ensure that our discomfort with the situation does not project just insane amounts of shame onto our child? Where we are communicating that these things are natural and normal, and while we might have some things around it that we would like to convey to our child, especially if we think that they're becoming addicted to masturbation or something is really unhealthy. Or maybe it's just a rule in our family that, certain things are acceptable and unacceptable. How do we communicate to our child that there is no shame in this? They have done nothing wrong. That this is not a projection of how we feel about our child doing something we're uncomfortable with, how our discomfort does not translate to them, that they are somehow wrong for it.
Yes, I totally agree. I have a boy who is, as you know, getting into that age when he's exploring himself and learning about it in school, learning about it from us. And I am preparing myself. So what I will do if, I will walk in on him would be, first of all, totally normal reaction, like, hey, oh, sorry, I'll give you a minute, and just walk out of the room. And then as I'm out of the room, waiting for him to, eventually show up in the living room, I will prepare the very safe space, if you wish, for him to enter into, when there will be no judgment, pure love, acceptance, normalcy, something that just happens, and just have him enter into that. And so far we did not have a situation when our kids walked in on us, because we take precautionary measures, if you will. But I did have a situation where I didn't walk into onto my parents. I did find a used condom under the bed. And I want to talk about it a little bit in relation to shame, like you, Antonia, mentioned. What I did, I carefully examined it, what it was. I had no idea, because I was probably like maybe 7 or 8. I had no idea what it was, where it came from. I figured, it was other than my parents' master bedroom, bed. So that's, I guess it has to do something with them. So I went downstairs and I just said, hey, guys, what is this? Their look on their faces was probably like a mixture of seeing Ed Scissorhands with with any kind of ghost from Harry Potter movies or something like that. They grabbed it out of my hand and they just chased me out of the room, and I heard them kind of raising voices at each other, probably like, why did you leave it there? No, it was my job to pick it up. Why did you throw it away? And in that moment, I remember that I felt really bad because I caused them to be fighting and yell at each other. After I figured out what it was, then I'm like, oh, so that's what it was. It was sex. And that was another way of, them kind of pushing under the rug and not talking about it. So if anything like that happens, I would really, really encourage parents to, be prepared to talk about it. No matter you walking on them, they're walking in on you, because it will save a lot of damage, if you will, later on in life.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to put this out there, and it's this. Who cares if the kids are masturbating and touching them? Is their brain going to melt? Are they going to lose an eye? What is going to happen to them? It's part of their body the same way. It feels good. It feels good. And they're going to be wanting to, because you've raised curious, intelligent. They were born a genius, and they're just running with that curiosity and that feel-good feeling. The same way they like ice cream is they want to touch themselves. So you know what? What we really have to decide is, what kind of kids are we committed to raising? This goes back to all the episodes that we've ran, which is, do we want our kids to walk through the world unfettered, their hands swinging, curious, open, and free? Or do we want them to be mini-me's and to have all of our crazies and projections on them? Here's what I want to say, which really might rub some parents the wrong way, but it's this, is that being a parent is, the reason why they say it's the hardest thing you're ever going to do is because it takes an immense amount of work to be able to deal with all of that stuff that you're dying to say or wanting to, all the crazies that we have going on in us, and do the work to suppress it. And go, okay, how can I show up for my kids so that I can handle in a way that's not creating further shame, that's not creating further drama, that's creating something that's closed in and contracted? That's work. That is not you wake up one day and you have those skills. You have to work at it. And it is bone-tiring work to be your highest self. But guess what? Everybody wins. You get to show up as your most high, most magnificent, epic self. Your kids get to walk to the world without barnacles weighing them down. And then they just strut. Free, open, expansive. Your husband wins, your partner wins, your friends win. It's worth it. That's the point. It's worth it. So to answer the question about masturbation, right now I probably know, like, my kids are 6 and 8. At some point in time, probably might hit at 10. I have no clue. They're already asking about sex. They're gonna want to put their hands down their pants and touch bits and pieces. So I'm going to preempt that with a conversation. It hasn't happened yet, but it's something that's going to be probably. Let's choose the holiday. Holiday's a good time. It's coming right up. The kids are home. And say, you know what, there might be times where you want to touch yourself and it feels good. And I can now decide whether or not my shame, my issue, my worry, my fears all come to bear about, well, if they touch themselves, they might want to have sex. But you know what? I'm not worried about that. because I also know what I'm committed to. And in every facet, even though I don't always get it right, in every facet, I'm asking questions, I'm communicating, I'm keeping us like this. So I'm not worried about anyone going off the rails and, doing it so much that their clit falls off. I'm worried. I want to make sure that they understand the needs of their body, don't have even any internal make wrong about the fact that they're touching themselves, and preempt all of that long before it happens. So that's number one about the whole masturbation talk. That's not necessarily going to be the conversation I'd have with a 5-year-old, right? So we talked about in the previous episodes the different age groups when kids start asking questions on the whole. But from 6 to 8, this is something I'm going to start preempting. Okay, and everyone knows their child better than anyone else, so you'll know where they are in that spectrum to bridge that conversation. And the part about kids walking in, watching, that actually has never happened. Not because we lock doors or anything like that. It just hasn't. My husband tends to have a high paranoia about that, and I just figure
same here.
because I'm not, maybe I'm not that interesting, because I tend to not be up on the chandeliers at that point where it's something like really whoa that might be really impactful. We tend to be under the covers. If they did happen to walk in, I would just we would stop. I would say, okay, mom and dad just need a moment. And if they asked what we were doing, because it's not a moment where we can just quickly, I need a moment. When they came back, I would just tell them, I go, sometimes mom and dad just like to have a cuddle where we kiss. Like we've talked about that at 6 and 8. We just like to kiss and hug and snuggle and, touch each other and, climb into each other's nooks and crannies. And at that moment, that's all they need. They did not need to know that there's this going into this right now, 5 seconds ago. But climbing into each other's nooks and crannies and getting all comfy is something that they can relate to because we do it with each other. So that's how I would explain that situation, so that it doesn't become a big hoopla and the kids are feeling, like, oh, what was happening there? And it's all shh. So
yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
I always think, every time we talk about this, I think of the dog whisperer. I always think of, when the dog whisperer says, I train owners, I rehabilitate dogs. I always think, man, it always comes back to you and your relationship with these topics. And I'm in your court, Ria. I think that this whole concept that masturbation is taboo, I think it's ridiculous. I'm not on board with it. And yet at the same time, I recognize that so many people have so much discomfort around it. So again, it starts with you and your relationship with these things. If you've gotten to a point where you've had open dialogue with your children around sex, if you've had open dialogue with your children around masturbation and all that, basically like the organic, natural topics that are coming up and expressing to them that this is all natural, normal, there's no reason to feel shame around this. This is just how humans work. This is how they operate. Then when it gets to the moment where you walk in on them, right? Because I'm anticipating this moment of heaven forbid I walk in on my stepsons, right? But I'm anticipating this moment of delivering laundry to a room, opening it up, holy crap, I forgot to knock, and now I'm in a situation. As far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't really feel like I needed to have a conversation with them about it at all. I'd say, I'm sorry that I interrupted your privacy, and I would leave. I would respectfully leave their private moment that they totally have a right to, as far as I'm concerned, right? I think children have a right to that. And at the same time, we've already preempted all of that awkwardness with a conversation beforehand about how we feel about the subject. So being willing to ask yourself, if you are anti-masturbation, why are you anti-masturbation? What is going on with you? What has happened in your past that you believe that this is wrong? We were just recently watching a Mad Men episode where a mom, a daughter was at a slumber party and she was touching herself. Well, the mom of the person whose slumber party she was at brought her home unceremoniously and dumped her at her house and said, we do not do that at our house. And it was all icky and shame-filled. And the mom was mortified and embarrassed and, oh my gosh, what is wrong with my child, right? So she takes her to a psychiatrist because she masturbated at somebody else's house. It's this huge hullabaloo. It's supposed to be 1965, right? And in the course of all this, it comes out that the mom, she's like, well, of course I masturbated when I was younger, right? I went through a phase, but I just never did it in public. We don't do that in public, right? That was the big thing. And it was like, well, every mom on the planet has gone, yeah, I did that, right? I did that, but my child isn't going to do that. It's so basically the mom is saying, you know, well, I did it too, but my daughter isn't going to. So at what point do we recognize that every person on the planet said that? Like, at what point do we recognize that every mom has said, well, I did it, but my kid isn't going to do it? Like, where do we stop with this delusion that somehow we're going to keep the next generation from doing something that every previous generation on the planet has done? Like, when are we going to make peace with that? So I'm with you. I like being willing to ask yourself what your relationship with masturbation is and why is a major component to not projecting all your shame, all your shit onto your kid.
Yeah. Absolutely. If there's so under the premise that we've all done it, a lot of us are still doing it. And if you, as a part of the preparation for that conversation, go back in time when you were, no matter age, what you were when you were masturbating. Really feel yourself back then. Think about it, how it was for you. What were you experiencing? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What did you think about, somebody walking in on you? How are you going to make a conversation with your parents about it? Really embody that feeling from, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And once you understand your own personal perspective on that, I think that's when you can make more peace with it and actually talk to your kid in a way that is, not filled with, prejudice or rules or anything like that. Because yes, we've all done it. Just, go from there. And like Ria, what you were saying about the mothers, just get and being loving your child in so much that you would allow him to know everything and go into that. A lot of it goes back to just get over yourself, get over your, rules and regulations of how you should be and how your kid should be, and just allow the conversation to flow, because the more freely information flows about all of these subjects that we talked about, the less awkwardness, the less shame will be around everything that we talked to.
The more trust as a parent you'll have too. Your kids will trust you. They'll think that you're not afraid. They won't see you as scared and running away. They'll see you as holding space, and they'll have trust that you can be there with them in tough times.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
Well said. Okay, well, that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Grow Great Live, and we will see you next time.